What happens when a Hollywood icon refuses to be reduced to a late-night punchline? When the cameras roll and the audience is primed for laughs? But instead of jokes, they get a storm of raw honesty? That's exactly what happened the night Sean Penn walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage, and within seconds, the entire studio realized this wasn't going to be just another cookie-cutter interview. The lights were blazing hot, the applause signs flashing, and the roar of the audience surged like a tidal wave. Sean Penn emerged from backstage, his steps measured, deliberate, almost heavy, as though he was carrying something far bigger than a movie promotion. He didn't strut, he didn't wave. He scanned the audience with that unmistakable Penn glare, the same intensity that had electrified films for decades. Jimmy Kimmel stood to greet him, that signature grin plastered across his face, but there was something rehearsed about it, something that looked less like welcome and more like defense. The handshake was firm but fleeting. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, and it was as if the entire room could sense the tension coiling in the air. And then came the smirk. Kimmel's smirk, the weapon he always used to cut his guests down before they even knew they were bleeding. But Penn wasn't here to play the role of punchline guest. He had brought something with him, something folded and tucked away in his jacket. A message, a statement, a warning to anyone who thought this night would follow the usual late-night script. The audience laughed and cheered, oblivious to the storm brewing. They thought they were about to see another harmless segment, a few laughs, a plug for a movie, a quick viral clip. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. This wasn't a performance, this was confrontation. And in the next few minutes, the line between comedy and cruelty would blur until everyone in the studio and everyone watching at home had to pick a side. "Sean Penn, welcome back to the show, pal," Jimmy Kimmel beamed, his voice dripping with enthusiasm. The audience roared as if they'd just witnessed royalty step onto the stage. Sean Penn gave a small nod, easing himself into the chair, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, scanning the studio as though he were studying a battlefield rather than a late-night set. Kimmel wasted no time diving into small talk, the kind of scripted warmth that late-night hosts deliver in their sleep. "Do you like coming back to New York City?" he asked, leaning forward with faux curiosity. "You remember you moved here when you first started your acting career, right?" Penn chuckled, but it was a dry, guarded laugh. "Yeah," he replied, his voice gravelly. "It's disorienting. I suspect for most people." The words were simple, but they landed heavy, like stones tossed into a still pond. The crowd laughed lightly, unsure if they were supposed to. The laughter didn't quite reach Penn, who remained stone-faced. Kimmel leaned back, holding his smile, but in his eyes flickered the tiniest shadow of discomfort. On the surface, it looked like a casual exchange, a host and a guest, reminiscing about old times. But just beneath that glossy layer of TV charm, there was an imbalance. The smiles looked painted on. The applause sounded mechanical. The stage lights felt harsher than usual, as if exposing more than they should. Narrator. To the untrained eye, it was harmless banter. But to anyone watching closely, the fault lines were already visible. The power dynamic wasn't working the way Kimmel expected. Penn wasn't settling into the role of the affable guest. He wasn't laughing at the jokes or feeding the audience easy sound bites. Instead, he was testing the room, feeling its weight, gauging the man across from him. The audience still believed they were in for another night of Hollywood charm, but what was about to unfold would shake the foundation of that very illusion. The banter barely had time to settle before Sean Penn reached into his jacket pocket. With the same calmness one might show pulling out a handkerchief, he unfolded a small piece of paper and placed it directly on Kimmel's desk. The studio leaned in. The paper looked ordinary, almost anticlimactic until Penn spoke. "This," he said flatly, "is a message I found in my dressing room, addressed to the FCC." The crowd laughed nervously, unsure if this was a bit or a bombshell. Kimmel flashed that trademark grin, trying to steer the mood back toward comedy. "Don't worry, Sean," he quipped. "We don't keep guillotines backstage." The audience chuckled harder, desperate for a release valve. But Penn didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he tapped the paper with a single finger. "I thought I'd just get it out of the way," he said, his tone sharper now. Brevity has its own kind of truth. The silence was deafening. A ripple of discomfort swept through the crowd, as if everyone realized simultaneously that this wasn't part of the script. Narrator. What Penn had just done was more than a stunt. In a single gesture, he had shifted the entire power dynamic. This wasn't a talk show anymore. This was a confrontation about freedom, about censorship, about the cheap currency of late-night humor versus the dignity of art. Kimmel, usually master of the room, leaned back and forced another laugh. But the smirk didn't land this time. For the first time that night, Jimmy Kimmel looked rattled. And Sean Penn, stone-faced, had barely spoken 10 words. The FCC letter was more than paper, it was a gauntlet. Trying to regain control, Kimmel shuffled his cards and leaned forward. Sean, there's a lot of information on the internet. Some of it's true, some of it's false. I thought it might be fun if we ran through a few rumors. The crowd perked up. Rumors meant laughs. This was familiar ground, Jimmy's arena. Okay, Kimmel grinned. You once sparred with Bob Dylan? Penn nodded without hesitation. More than once, he replied. I had a 16-foot boxing ring at my house. Bob would show up early in the morning with a hoodie pulled over his head and half a dozen mastiffs spilling out of a van. We'd spar, no small talk. Just good, good. And then we fought. The audience chuckled, expecting a punchline, but none came. Penn sat still, his expression grave, as if recounting a battlefield memory rather than a quirky Hollywood anecdote. The laughter fizzled out mid-breath. Kimmel cleared his throat, searching for levity. I would have paid anything to see that. But Penn wasn't interested in jokes. He wasn't playing. Narrator. In that moment, the audience understood. Penn wasn't there to serve up internet rumors as punchlines for Kimmel's desk. He was reclaiming them, transforming tabloid fodder into lived experience, refusing to let his life be reduced to clickbait comedy. Each rumor Kimmel tried to spin, Penn anchored in reality. His tone was steady, unflinching. It wasn't entertainment, it was testimony. And with every passing second, the gap between Kimmel's smirk and Penn's silence grew wider, the tension sharper. The game had begun, but Penn was rewriting the rules. Kimmel shuffled his cards again, searching for ground he could stand on. He leaned forward with a mischievous grin. At one point, Sean, you wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Is that true? The audience laughed on cue, already picturing Sean Penn under a spotlight, telling jokes, fumbling through punchlines. They expected a lighthearted moment, maybe even a self-deprecating story. Penn nodded slowly. Yes, he said. At one point, I wanted to challenge myself with the terror of stand-up. He paused, his eyes darkening. And it was a terror. It hurt the people in the audience. The studio fell silent. The laugh that should have followed never came. Penn's delivery wasn't playful. It was cold, unflinching, almost accusatory, as if he were holding a mirror up to the room itself. Kimmel tried to chuckle, waving it off. Come on, Sean, it couldn't have been that bad. But Penn didn't budge. He let the weight of his words sit in the air, daring anyone to laugh again. Narrator. In a single sentence, Penn had killed the comedy. What should have been a harmless setup for a late-night punchline became something else entirely, a declaration of authority. He wasn't here to entertain on command. He wasn't here to make Jimmy's jokes land. He was here to reclaim the narrative. The audience shifted in their seats, caught between discomfort and awe. Kimmel's smirk flickered, the first real crack in his armor. This wasn't banter anymore. This was a clash of intent. And Sean Penn was winning. Desperate to regain control, Kimmel flipped to another card. All right, how about this one? You heard Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska before anyone else? Penn leaned back, exhaling through his nose. For the first time that night, a faint softness touched his voice. That's true, he said. I was engaged to Bruce's sister Pam. She shared a demo with me. It was the first time I heard Nebraska. The audience leaned in. No one expected this. Penn's eyes grew distant, as if replaying the moment in his head. I wasn't a concert goer, never was, but when I heard Highway Patrolman, it changed me. That song became the foundation for my first film, The Indian Runner. It was more than music, it was a map, a way forward. The room was still. Even Kimmel stayed quiet, his usual quip stuck in his throat. For once, the host wasn't running the show. Sean Penn was. Narrator. What began as an attempt at levity turned into a masterclass on art. Kimmel wanted a quirky story. Instead, Penn delivered an origin myth, how a song became a film, how music shaped a life. In a room built for laughter, Penn gave them reverence. The audience didn't clap, didn't laugh. They simply listened, and in that silence, the power shifted entirely. Sean Penn wasn't just a guest. He was a force. The studio lights seemed hotter now, pressing down on both men. Kimmel shuffled his cards, but Penn wasn't waiting for the next cue. He leaned forward, his voice calm but deliberate. "There's a quote from Orson Welles I've always carried with me," Penn said. He said acting in theater is like carving in snow. The words landed with a strange stillness. Some in the audience leaned back, others tilted forward, as if waiting for the punchline, but no punchline came. Penn continued, his tone reverent. "You carve, and it melts. It disappears. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a film will linger in people's minds, but most of the time, it vanishes. That's the nature of art. It's fleeting, fragile, yet somehow more powerful because of that." The audience murmured softly, caught between awe and confusion. This was not late-night banter. This was philosophy, delivered in prime time. Kimmel forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, I guess that makes me the guy with the snow shovel, huh?" The joke barely scraped the air before dying on contact. No one laughed. Not even a pity chuckle. Narrator. The contrast was blinding. On one side, Jimmy Kimmel with his arsenal of jokes, desperate to keep the rhythm of a comedy show alive. On the other, Sean Penn, speaking of snow, of impermanence, of the sacred fragility of craft. The audience was divided not between host and guest, but between expectation and revelation. And in that silence, in that rift, something irreversible happened. The room belonged to Sean Penn now. Sensing he had to steer things back, Kimmel reached for the most reliable card in the deck, the movie plug. "Sean's got a new film out," he said, raising his voice. "One battle after another, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, music by Johnny Greenwood. It's incredible, you've got to see it." The crowd applauded on cue, grateful for something familiar. Kimmel leaned in, trying to reset the vibe. "Sean, tell us about this character. How did you come up with the walk, the voice? It's unlike anything you've done before." Penn shook his head slowly. "I won't talk about the movie." The words hit like a slap. Kimmel blinked, caught off guard. You won't?" "No," Penn said firmly. "Reading that script for the first time, that was my experience of the film. If I explain it, I'm stealing the surprise from the audience. It's theirs now, not mine." The audience hushed again. No laughter, no applause, just silence thick enough to touch. Narrator. In refusing to spoil his own work, Penn delivered a subtle but brutal jab at the late-night machine. These shows thrived on commodifying art, carving it into digestible bits, spoon-feeding audiences just enough to keep them laughing, clapping, and buying tickets. But Penn wasn't playing that game. He wasn't there to market, he was there to defend. Kimmel forced a chuckle, but his shoulders slumped. The rhythm was broken again. And this time, it wasn't coming back. Sean Penn had turned a promo segment into a declaration. Art is not a commodity, it's a covenant. Jimmy Kimmel wasn't ready to surrender. He leaned forward, his smile tighter than before. "Come on, Sean, we've got to have a little fun here. That's what the audience expects." The crowd chuckled lightly, clinging to Jimmy's rhythm, but Sean Penn didn't even blink. His posture was rigid, his eyes locked on the host. "You want the laughs," Penn said slowly, "and we bear the scars." The words dropped like a hammer. The laughter evaporated instantly. The air shifted. You could feel the audience's breath catch. Someone in the back let out a soft gasp. Kimmel tried to chuckle, but it came out strained. "It's just comedy, Sean." Penn leaned in, his voice low but cutting. "Comedy at someone else's expense. Always. And those expenses aren't jokes, they're years, they're lives, they're the bruises you never see." The silence deepened, heavier than before. Kimmel's smirk faltered, his shoulders sinking. The balance of power on that stage was gone, stripped away in a single line. Narrator. In that instant, the show's foundation collapsed. What was supposed to be playful banter revealed itself as confrontation. The humor, the scripted rhythm, the glossy packaging, all of it shattered under the weight of Sean Penn's refusal to play along. The studio audience sat in stunned quiet, unsure if they should clap, laugh, or stay still. Their hesitation was answer enough. Jimmy Kimmel had lost the room. Penn didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was steady, almost measured, but each word landed with surgical precision. "You know what people forget," he began, eyes never leaving Kimmel's, "is that behind every film, every story, there are years of work. Not just mind crews, writers, designers, men and women who bleed themselves dry to put something real on that screen." The audience was frozen, no coughs, no shuffling, just silence. And when we sit here, Penn continued, and turn all of that labor into a setup for a cheap laugh, we erase it, we mock it. We tell the people who gave their lives to the work that what they did is nothing more than a punchline. Kimmel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked smaller now, swallowed by his own chair. Penn gestured to the folded paper still on the desk. That note to the FCC, people thought it was a joke, but it isn't. Because this isn't about censorship, it's about respect. Respect for art, respect for the blood and time poured into every frame of film. His voice hardened, though he never raised it. Art is fragile, it's fleeting. Like carving in snow. And if we don't honor it, it melts before our eyes. You can laugh at me all you want, but when you laugh at the work, you laugh at every person who built it. The silence was thunderous now, louder than applause could ever be. The audience sat forward, riveted, some with their mouths slightly open. Even the camera operators had stopped shifting, their lenses locked in. Narrator. Sean Penn wasn't delivering an interview anymore. He was delivering a reckoning. A monologue not scripted by writers, but carved from conviction. And in that moment, the silence itself became the loudest sound in the room. Kimmel swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the audience, then back to Penn. For once, he had no comeback, no joke, no escape hatch. Sean Penn had taken the stage and he had taken the night. Chapter 1. Host collapse, clip rescue attempt, 10-50. Ears taught 350 words. Jimmy Kimmel's hands trembled as he shuffled his note cards. His usual fallback humor had failed. His only chance now was to retreat to the safety of a movie clip. Well, he stammered, forcing a smile. Why don't we just roll the clip from one battle after another? The audience clapped weakly, grateful for any direction out of the tension. But Sean Penn didn't even look at the screen. He turned to Kimmel, voice firm, eyes sharp. Save it for theaters, Penn said. Here, we talk respect. The line hit like a lightning bolt. Half the crowd erupted into applause. The other half sat frozen, unsure whether to cheer or stay silent. The divide in the room was visible, raw, undeniable. Narrator. Kimmel's escape hatch had been slammed shut. His script, his rhythm, his authority, it was gone. In its place stood a guest who refused to be packaged into a marketing segment. Kimmel's smile faltered again. For the first time all night, the late-night king looked like a man out of moves. The studio lights hummed, cameras rolled, and for several long seconds, no one spoke. Sean Penn sat back in his chair, calm and unmoved. His authority was quiet, almost regal. Jimmy Kimmel shifted uncomfortably, the weight of silence pressing down harder than any heckle. Narrator. That night, story beat joke. Dignity beat sarcasm. In a theater built for laughter, the loudest sound was respect. Penn finally rose from his seat, adjusting his jacket. No grand gesture, no dramatic storm-off, just a steady walk toward the wings, leaving behind a host stripped bare of his confidence. Kimmel forced a laugh, but it cracked in his throat. His eyes darted to the audience, searching for comfort that wasn't there. He had been bested not by anger, not by volume, but by conviction. Narrator. Respect is earned, not manufactured for laughs. And when Sean Penn walked out that night, he carried more than his own dignity. He carried the silence of a room that had just witnessed something unforgettable. The camera lingered on Kimmel's face, pale under the hot lights. And then, the question every viewer at home had to answer echoed through the narrative. Which side are you on?